It's my pleasure to invite her up, Ms. Sushma Rajagopalan, MD and CEO, ITC Infotech. She is Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director, ITC Infotech, a wholly owned subsidiary of ITC Limited, one of India's most admired companies. She is also the chairperson of the NASSCOM IT Services Council, is premier trade body and Chamber of Commerce of the IT BPM industries in India. An industry stalwart, she has over 30 years of global leadership experience in the information technology industry. She's led organizational transformations, headed strategy and corporate developments, and has been responsible for several large acquisitions through planned strategic investments. She's passionate about entrepreneurship and building a viable ecosystem to promote new thinking and an innovation culture. She's actively identified, groomed, and mentored startups in the US and India. Multiple accolades to her name, Innovator in Technology in 2013 and Best Technology Woman Leader in 2011. It's my pleasure to hand over the stage to Sushma. She's going to introduce the next set of speakers and start off this session. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Sushma, all yours.
Thank you very much. Oh boy, it's a tough act to follow, let me tell you that. And before I begin, my utmost sincerest compliments. I wanted to say kids, but they're not. They are the leaders today. I wouldn't like to say that they are even the leaders of tomorrow. They are the leaders today. Soumya, Ishita, Saad, fabulous job, fabulous job. And of course, extremely well curated and moderated by Pramod. I feel like a relic, but the biggest learning that I have from this previous session, it's an automatic lead into our session, which is all about new rules of engagement. Now, I really don't have to drive it home anymore. It was evident, it was in Roman letter 200, written all over, that the rules of engagement have to change. Now, who better than some of the eminent panelists that we have? I'd like to invite on stage Maya Hari. Maya is the Managing Director of Asia Pacific and India with Twitter. And she's got an illustrious background, highly pedigreed. So Soumya and Ishita, here is another role model for you in terms of who you could potentially learn from. Now, Twitter epitomizes the new economy. I want to invite another new economy player, Flipkart. The Chief Operating Officer of Flipkart, Nitin Seth. And for those of you who are avid followers of the new economy, new age companies, Flipkart in a recently done survey accounts for 75% of the revenues of the 41 leading consumer internet companies, but only accounts for 45% of the losses. So a big hand to Nitin, folks. And who better than Karthik Kaushik, who epitomizes the old world? He epitomizes the old world morphing into new. Karthik Kaushik, Managing Director, Citibank. So I want to just start this discussion with the business report at the World Economic Forum, where Schwab basically said that we live in a hyper-connected world and we bear the burden of the complexity of it. And we who are sitting here are the ones who are mandated to simplify that complexity. That is the world that we are living in today. It's no longer about the strongest. It's no longer about the smartest. And if I can quote Charles Darwin, it is about the one who is going to be the most adaptable and one who is going to be most adaptable in the speediest form. So what I'd love to be able to do is open this out, and I was deliberately very brief in my introduction of the panel. I would like to be able to pose a question to each one of you here, and we'll go from the new economy to the old economy. Okay? where it's all about survival and survival being done in the most adaptable fashion. Maya, when you look at Twitter, how is Twitter going to? Twitter has already set the bar very high in terms of rules of engagement. How are you going to please the Saumyas, the Ishitas, and the Sads of the world?
Well, pleasing the kids, that's a tough one, I will say. But I think some of the things they talked about, you have to be able to meet these kids where they are. You cannot expect that they will come to you. You have to meet them where they are. Now, being in the platform business, if they choose to spend time on a platform like Twitter, that's great. But you've got to be able to adapt to how they're thinking. They want to know right this second what's happening in the world around them. And they want to know based on their interests, and they want to know based on people they admire, people they may know or they may not know. And to me, engaging with this always-on consumer has to be done in an always-on way. But how many of us as an industry know to do that well, right? And to me, unpacking that and learning that is the journey that collectively as an industry we're going through. And Twitter learns that on a daily basis too, right? We have to adapt. To me, our consumers, we had an amazing insight that our consumers are thinking visually. When you said something to them, isn't this great? They weren't thinking, yes, this is great. They were actually thinking like this. Can you imagine? That's an emoji. That is a GIF. So visually, what comes to them, the language that they're thinking in, is visual. And that's a fundamental shift. We shifted. Our platform learned that, and we had to actually start providing ready GIFs for people to share. And that's a massive upturn in engagement on a platform like Twitter. So that's one small example, but even us as a platform are constantly listening to our consumers and adapting to their style of communication.
Very interesting point. So point number one, rules of engagement, really shifting more and more from text-based to graphical and visual communication. In a way, it's actually going back to the ancient ways in which we would communicate. You know, there's a bit of a paradox in this. We'll come back to that point. So if I can shift focus to you, Nitin, what is the rules of engagement that someone like Flipkart adopts? Because your market segment it has two cohorts to it. It's truly bimodal. You've got the savvy young customers, and you also have the rising middle India. So what does Flipkart do in order to balance this? What would you come up in terms of creative and innovative ways to engage with the bimodal market segment that you have?
The first kind of point I want to make is that the understanding of who the typical Indian e-commerce consumer is changing very, very rapidly. I think until recently, that typical e-commerce consumer was from the top 6 metros and was probably the top of the pyramid from an income segmentation perspective, probably earning at least 10 lakhs per annum. But that is changing at quite a fast pace. So if I look at our numbers now, 65% plus of our new customers acquired are coming from the non-metros. And that's a very significant shift. The typical consumer today is probably from a 3 to 5 lakh income bracket, which is probably going down the income pyramid quite significantly. So the Indian consumer is changing very, very significantly. It has implications in terms of what they want to buy, how they want to buy it, and where they are located. So for most people who are based here, sitting in this room, books, probably something for your home, maybe those are the type of things that you first started buying from a Flipkart or from a Snapdeal or from an Amazon. But somebody who's who's at a very different income segment, he or she is not buying a book. He or she is not buying a home kind of, a kitchen equipment. For them, it is very different set of needs. It's probably mobile. And it's very interesting that in India, more people have own mobiles than have access to sanitation. So what they're looking to buy is very different. The way they are looking to access the internet is very different. That the new Indian consumer is almost entirely mobile driven. They have mobile, but they don't necessarily have access to data. That poses a number of technological challenges in terms of how do you make it, while they have the device, but how do you make the e-commerce platform more accessible to them? So it has implications around that. It has implications around reach, because e-commerce is not just a digital experience, it's also a physical delivery experience. And if a lot of your customers are now in tier 2, tier 3, and tier 4 cities, that has implications in terms of your reach. So for example, we run a very large supply chain, and that supply chain is not, was earlier very kind of metro and large town dominated, but now it is all about how do you increase your pin code presence very significantly. So there are very, very significant implications for the business model, which go across both the categories of what you're offering to the consumer, how you're delivering it from a technology perspective, and how you finally are delivering the physical product.
Fantastic. So turning to the old world, Citibank, Karthik, you've recently in a interview said that 85% of your consumers today are really extremely tech savvy. How are you straddling this world of, and I'm going to point this specifically to asset management, okay, where you have the traditional asset managers who are high touch, almost averse to technology. And then you've got the employed wealth, who are hard pressed for time, who are hungry for information, and who are people who want service almost without any touch, okay? So from the high touch to the zero touch, what is Citibank doing in order to sort of cross this digital paradigm?
Sure. Thanks, Sushma. And it's always exciting to be in the middle of people who are bringing change, and then to be a 200-plus-year-old brand, learning how to survive and thrive as change happens around you. So that's always an opportunity. I think you talked about two cohorts, and there are multiple cohorts in all our lives. Most of my consumers are sitting here, but the future consumers were sitting before us in these three chairs. And we talked about hyper-connected consumer. To me, the hyper-connected consumer today has unlimited information access. And in a business, you talked about wealth management as one of the needs which is transforming. In a business which traditionally relied on the engagement model has changed dramatically. The customer's expectation of what they do every day in their daily lives versus my asking them for clarifying mother's maiden name and a variety of other 20 things before I can service them is certainly not an expectation that can any longer hold in a business model. And that is really the fundamental starting point. So the first thing that's dramatically different is the task of managing content. And content no longer is curated by the organization that's the brand owner. Content today is curated by everyone who's in the ecosystem. So you no longer can have communication. In the past, that brand was unidimensional, which is I communicate and hope my customers understand and buy or engage. Today, you have to actually have a dialogue. And imagine moving from a unidimensional business model to having content where you have only the ability to engage, but not direct. And we just heard that from three very, very promising young people, that they don't like to be directed. They like to engage. They have access to information and knowledge which is far superior, and they have points of views that they want to engage with. The second facet that I want to talk about, which has changed around us, is the fact that the community for opportunity, right? What we've been creating through the social ecosystem. And the community opportunity is no longer limited to the best friends that I have or the people that I could reach out to. Advice today is universally available. Points of views are universally available. And they are real time. There is no time to kind of come back and curate that. Therefore, the nature of collaboration and the nature of customization has also got to change. We no longer can offer, and many of you, if I'm speaking a little forward-looking views, you would engage to the fact that if on the site of a Flipkart of Amazon, you can see who else bought and what's trending, why when you can't log in into wealth management portal of Citi, can you see people like me, what have they bought, what do their portfolios look like, and can I mirror their portfolio and buy into it and play along? That is really the future, and are we willing to embrace it? Is that where the business model is going to go? And that's really the challenge. And you talked about the 85% or more, connected cohort. The reality is all of us sitting here, the employed wealth community in all the emerging markets has been a complete disruption. It is something that's 10 to 15-year-old. It's a wealth creation where people have arrived, but their personal sense of having arrived doesn't exist. They're extraordinarily busy. They want information, they want to consume, they want to make the decision, but they want all information at access. And they don't have the time to visit anyone, right? They want things available to them. And therefore, both the cohorts have to coexist. So that's the challenge. And the joy of dealing with multiple cohorts and the hyper-connected consumer is really what keeps the 200-year-old brand active and excited.
But the world of two cohorts and bimodality will not last forever and forever. But the key point here is that as a conventional old world company like Citibank, they are really no longer just competing with the financial services companies. They're competing with the Twitters and they're actually competing with the Flipkarts because the new age economies are the ones who are setting the bar in terms of engagement. And that's one of the things that I think we all need to be able to learn, that your competition sphere is no longer, limited to the segment in which you operate. I want to shift focus a little bit towards how we now deal with employees, okay, from a rules of engagement standpoint. So about 12 months ago, I took a decision in my company that I will stop sending emails. So today, I do not send emails. I communicate with my 7,000 employee base in 160 characters, okay? There's a stream of messages that go, it's there on the desktop messages, it's not always collaborative, but the information stream is no more than 160 characters. I would like to throw this to the panel and say, tell me one thing that you may be doing differently in terms of how you interact with your teams, with your peers in your organizations. Anyone? Yeah, all of you. Yeah.
I'll kick us off. I thought it was interesting you said that you communicate in 160 characters. I was thinking...
I almost wanted to say Twitter-like fashion.
You set me up well. Yeah. But I was actually thinking, for me, the thing that has changed the most, email used to be 5 years ago the way to send something quickly and get a response quickly. That's no more the case. If I send an email, the expectation from the team is that we will solve within 24 hours. To me, one of the natural byproducts of managing with the team is we actually own DM groups. So we're direct messaging each other all the time, right, in terms of communication style. And what's interesting is that we mix personal and professional together in there. And that feels very natural to our teams, right? And it's a reflection of, let's say, consumers on a platform in social. Right? It's the reflection of how the youth today are really expecting everything in an instant, are looking at things real time. They want to be able to communicate, solve, and consume live. And I think it's actually showing through in how we're decision making in groups, in a direct messaging group.
So interesting that the new rules of engagement is blurring the lines between work and personal. And Maya, one of the things that I read about, one of the statements that you had made, is that the new rules of engagement is about really getting to have a personal relationship with people, regardless of whether it's work or so I thought it was a very, very powerful and intuitive point. Over to you.
Sure. So I think, the opportunity, again, I will go back to where the connected opportunity is. We are having employee cohorts as well. That's true at all points of time. What I've changed is that all large institutions, as we all grow, right, the strength of a large institution and a scaled institution is processes. And as a result of that, we become very functionally and product line siloed because we want to have sharp optimization and capability building, right? And that's what we end up doing. As a result of that, communication is very sharp and segmented rather than horizontal. So when you go through a customer journey transformation and you're going to do it through sharp segmented silos, communication is not going to reach everyone, right? How do you create that common segment? So the way I've done it is I've embraced exactly what I do now outward in the marketplace. And I was sharing with Maya, we are the only bank that trends on Twitter with our campaigns, right? And that's a dramatic transformation, not just India, but global. And, that's a transformation we've done outward. We've done the same transformation inward. So my employees have the same access. I talk to them not with emails, but I video. I get onto my Collaborate site. Every visit, every communication, everything that I'm doing, good, bad, is out there. And they have the access to me direct one-on-one. And it's public. So it's vulnerability. It's the ability to be actually living up to what you communicate. And then they are watching you at all points of time because they can see your action or the lack of it in every facet. So that is, to me, a very dramatic shift. The fact that you cannot have a plan and a package and veneers around you, but you have to be absolutely the way you are, both outward and inward, is, I think, the biggest change. And we've embraced it. I personally do that as my biggest change. Yeah.
See, for me, what's different about engaging, communicating with the employee today is not just about the medium. It is about the actual intent and the nature of that communication. What I find in our company is that the hunger of our employees for information and transparency around the dialogue is extraordinarily high. So we have a fortnightly, we call it FOF, Flip Out Fridays. It's a fortnightly town hall, which we get our employees together. And we have like an open kind of message board, a bit like what you have here, a panel Q&A, where it's an open thing. You kind of put your question, and people upvote and downvote, and the questions are absolutely brutal. So, and just the kind of honesty of dialogue that happens in these town halls, these fortnightly town halls, I think is quite extraordinary. And the amount of effort and time commitment that our leaders are making into that, I think I find that to be very special, especially having come from a quote-unquote older world company. So I spent 6 years in Fidelity, 14 years in McKinsey, and the type of questions that get asked in our town hall, if those questions were asked in one of my previous companies, something quite dramatic would have happened. Yeah, so I think that's what has been the reflection for me, that it's a very different employee that we are dealing with, and the intensity of information that they want and the transparency of dialogue is of a totally different order of magnitude.
So the new rules of engagement are about personalization. It's also about honesty and transparency. Okay? While the rest of the world can hold Twitter and Flipkart as sort of the icons, where do the two of you derive your source of inspiration? How do you get to the what next of the rules of engagement? Do you meet with the Sads, the Soumyas, and the Ishitas of the world on a regular basis? Where are you actually drawing this from?
I think we're constantly learning from our consumers. For us, that's really the key. To me, consumers start to give you a sign of how they're changing, how they want to evolve, how the platform evolves and keeps up with them. So, a good example of how our consumers are changing right now is video. Our consumers started telling us with signals, with analytics, with their own choices of clicks and views on what they choose to consume. In India alone on Twitter, we've had 400% growth of consumption of video, right? So it inherently made us pivot our investments to focus on video. We have therefore thought through live video. We've enhanced our capabilities with Periscope, with long-form video, short-form video. It's very clear. So we actually take our cues from the consumer on what their consumption preferences are, and that's where we put our investment, right? And so the inspiration for us comes from consumers. Jack Dorsey, our CEO, earlier this year actually went publicly on Twitter and said, tell us what you'd like to do with the platform. These are users who use it all the time. And that's the nature of transparent conversation. It's a platform that's public and it's live and it's conversational, which means Soumya today could go have a conversation with Jack and say, I'd love you to build the product like this. And that's out there And the onus is on us as a platform to respond, and that's sort of how we evolve our capabilities. So a lot of our investments in video have been because our consumers have shown that that's what they wanted.
We'll be taking questions from the audience as well, so feel free. I don't know, I don't see the Twitter, okay. I'm not able to see that from here. Are there any stats around client losses due to increased engagement leading to nuisance value? Now, this is a dialogue that we have with our customers a lot, especially in hospitality. You know, how much of technology should really be used in dealing with customers? So any stories on the kind of scars that you may have had on making interactions a nuisance value?
Sure, I can take that and give you some, because I did talk about the fact that when you have to take on a brand which is 200-year-old and global and suddenly decide to take that social in any part of the world, there is a very big challenge that you're taking on, because the ability to be constantly engaged, yeah, and deal with both the directed and the absolutely uncurated is the challenge. So to that question very specifically, it was a huge challenge because typically, and it's an industry where service quality, and that's the reason we borrow from what we are learning across, the service quality paradigm within the industry is average, because the first priority is security and concern, and under the garb of security, concern, and controls, many times the actual customer journey and the impact is always, thought about as the second priority. This, what it has given, is the sharp edge on both fronts. So we get tons of complaints, as much as we get tons of positives, right? And I will give you both examples. As soon as we put out something, today I don't have to announce a launch. And you'd be amazed. I mean, in India, and all of you are consumers, the biggest challenge for all my brethren in the e-commerce world is the two-factor authentication, right? A huge amount of abandonment on an average between the time that you actually are on your session and the OTP comes, and you switch sessions and come back from a payment gateway, on an average, you lose 26 to 30% of abandonment. That's when a person has decided to buy. And I'm not talking about previous to that, right? And the opportunity to make a change to allow you to have that experience of a single checkout is something that we delivered to Amazon first, right, in the marketplace. But when we did that, we didn't announce it. We went beta live and we tested. That afternoon, within 10 minutes, right, we had about 50 Twitter feeds, right? People had already experienced it. There was both wow and surprise. There were those who were concerned that had we stopped doing it properly securely, and those who were wowed saying, wow, you actually did it and made my life easy, right? The point is there is active feedback. Is there nuisance value? There are always people who use medium, and that facility has always existed. I can not tell you the quantum of mails, letters, and complaints that RBI, our ombudsman, and each one of us deals with. And we deal with it with a very, very intense, feedback view. Today, it's out there in the public. So frankly, the opportunity to pick that, both from a positive and negative feedback, is available. And we saw the positive side of it during demonetization. The fact that the quality of service was real, and people were struggling walking into the branches. I have a handful compared to all my peers. And the quality of engagement they got there, my or non-customers of mine, was out there on Twitter and everywhere else. So it's a double-edged sword. There are no easy ways to handle it. But I think transparency and being forthright in terms of what your policy is and what your willingness to change, both have to be visible there. That's my experience. I don't know if...
See, I think the whole issue of segmenting your customer base becomes even more important. I know segmentation has been key, but segmenting them in terms of who is going to abide by the new rules of engagement, who is not, is going to be a very, very powerful insight that you have to draw in terms of how you deal with any business. And this is true for hospitality, it's true for banks, it's true for IT services, it's true for across the board. Because at least for the next several years, you will have that bimodality that will continue, and the two cohorts that we'll have to continue to shepherd. Nitin, there was a fun one here. I'm going to ask it. This is a reflection of the honest and transparent interaction that new rules of engagement are bringing. It says, Nitin, why are you wearing 2 watches?
There's one watch and there is Fitbit, so I'm trying to follow my 10,000 steps a day, and creature of habit, so I have still not removed my watch. So, yeah.
So on a lighter note, I'm not old economy. I have both in one.
No, but this also brings a very interesting point, and this is something that Maya can talk to, okay? The new world of engagement is all about uni-screen. all right? Everything in one. So whoever has asked this question, it was not a flippant question, okay? So Maya, I know you're passionate about this, so can you talk about the trends of a uni-screen to capture information as opposed to multi-screen?
Yeah, it's amazing. We are at the heart of Uniscreen happening, right? We went from being very desktop-centric as a world, and we said mobile first is going to happen. You know, I can attest to the fact that Twitter has, in any country, anywhere from about 70 to 90% of users on mobile, right? And that's the reality for us. So we're solving fundamentally for a mobile audience. Traditionally, what has happened is, in what we see is people watch TV and they'll tweet while watching TV. And this has traditionally been the dual screening that has happened. And eyeballs are split between two screens. In some cases, attention goes away from the TV. In Twitter's case, we actually complement because the conversations are happening about what's going on TV. What we're doing now is interesting. Our consumers are indicating the preference for a uniscreen. So instead of giving them the option to divide attention, watch the TV, look back on the mobile phone, we're actually bringing premium live video content to the same screen. So everything sits on mobile. It's premium content, right? We started this with NFL in the US, so that the Football League. We brought live games to the mobile phone. We partnered with the rights owners and the content owners. And here the experience was that you're seeing the premium content and you're seeing the conversations around it in one go. The consumption experience doesn't stop with watching the football game. It actually is also about celebrating with the community of people when you know, the right moment happens, to be able to complain about something and to do this virtually. It used to be, we used to sit on a couch on the TV and, you know, when cricket, when a six happened, we would all celebrate together, right? Now you don't necessarily celebrate with people on the couch, you're celebrating with the virtual community. So the Uniscreen is here, right? And we're bringing Filmfare Awards to the platform. We brought the union budget. And you'll see this across the digital industry. It's not just us, but you'll see this everywhere. But Uniscreen is here to stay, and we're building the ecosystem jointly with broadcasters and content owners, so it's a win-win for everybody, including the consumer.
So here's an interesting one. Do we see a role for a regulator that controls engagement by business houses with their customers? Before we get to this, how many of you all know that there is something called a Unicode Consortium, which sort of is the body that streamlines every emoji that is being put out? And guess what? This was actually founded somewhere in the 80s by Xerox and Apple. Okay, that was the genesis of the Unicode Consortium. Is there going to be some consortium of that kind that's going to start controlling engagement by business houses with their customers? And this is very important, because even if you take the Indian context, right, companies law prescribes what kind of information can you share. There is, you know, uniformity of information that needs to be disseminated to shareholders. What is the view of the panel, and particularly you, you know, who is closest to the regulator?
Closest is the absolute right word. I think one of the things people don't realize is that the differences in the spectrum of business model evolution is also driven by the core underlying business model and what we are permitted or not permitted to do, and what's sensible and not sensible to do. So many times we listen to a lot of the new age business models talking about how data and intelligence and cognitive is inherently the transformation agenda for the business model. I think there are very few businesses which actually have the quantum of data and the color of data that a bank has. Especially if, you know, the quality of transactions, they can look at a set of wallets, I can look across every spend category. I can do predictive in terms of patterns of behavior from the time you make a change. I know there is nothing that I don't know in terms of events, because every event has a fiscal implication, both at the corporate and the consumer level, and therefore we can both predict and take action on. However, the fundamental principle in the business model is about privacy. And therefore, there is a very thin line in terms of at what level of individual customization should we go and lead and utilize that data? And all the regulators are very actively over this. This doesn't just apply to us. Many other regulated entities have the same trade-off. And then there is the aspect of how you actually make that useful, because the hyper-connected customer, one of the big changes the consumer is asking, each one of us is asking, I give so many permissions to everyone, right? And everyone is giving me value add in their propositions with the value of the information that's available. As a bank, as a financial service ecosystem, as a hospitality industry, what are you giving me? How are you adding that value back? And the trade-off between doing it at the individual customized and intruding into privacy versus the trade-off of doing it at common segment levels or common pattern levels and then providing that is the dilemma that is constantly facing us. And I do want people to recognize that that is always a trade-off, because we cannot go and look at the customer's privacy compromise at any point of time. The regulators are all over it, domestic and international, and there is a healthy balance that's maintained, because I do want to call out the fact that the Indian regulator is extremely focused on consumer protection, and as people are converting from non-standard physical payment modes to digital payment modes, the possibility of not having adequate awareness and intelligence is something they want to be very, very careful of, to not have large-scale issues. So there is a very healthy engagement that's there, and it's evolving because too many new things are evolving as we speak.
Nitin, and if you can answer it, and then with your closing comment as well, because we are sort of getting to the end of the segment.
So this topic around the regulator, I think there are bits that what Kaushik said, I agree. I think there are also bits that I strongly disagree. Now, as far as ensuring data integrity and customer data privacy, I totally agree. We need to have clear norms around that, and the regulator needs to enforce that. But I think we should also be very conscious of regulator overreach. Yeah, recently there have been initiatives, where the Quality Council has reached out to us, trying to understand customer complaints and things like that. We welcome them. I think from a kind of in terms of setting the bar higher, I think that's a good thing to do. But I think if regulator takes on the mantle of trying to drive customer service, customer engagement quality, I think that's an extraordinary slippery slope. I don't think the regulator, any government regulator, is best placed to drive what the customer wants and how organizations deliver that. This is a free market. I think that's a strength we have. There is intense competition, and the intense competition is the best way for companies to raise their game and deliver the best for the customers. So while there are bits which are important, but I would be hugely skeptical about regulator overreach here.
Karthik, closing comments?
Yeah, sure. I don't think we disagree. I think it's an interpretation that happened, because what I just was pointing out, that the regulator is actively engaged from what they want to regulate. It's not that the regulator is defining what we need to do. And as an industry, and every industry has their own regulatory or governing bodies, it's the industry's role actively to educate all participants and stakeholders, including the regulator. And to the domestic regulator, I want to call out the fact that they have been extraordinarily progressive, right? Much more progressive than many other parts of the world, and extremely keeping their part of the secure, consumer focus balanced at that. So I don't think we disagree. I think it's just colors and perspectives.
Maya, closing comments?
Well, I think there's huge opportunity for us. If you take the hyper-connected consumer, as brands, we have a lot of things to think about. Where do you meet them? How do you engage with them? And what do you do? Right? And there's lots of opportunity there. I think meeting them where they hang out is important, rather than trying to force them to change their behavior to meet you where you want them to come to. That, to me, is the key point. I think the language in which we communicate with consumers is extremely important. You can't speak Hindi to a Tamil-speaking person and then expect them to respond. To the same way, to the millennials of today, you have to be able to use platforms of creative expression. You have to be able to find ways to immerse them in live experiences, real-time, video. These are all things that we cannot do without, and we have to learn how to do these well. How do you do live and instant video and still have perfectly produced quality? Those two things don't sit well with each other. So these are proactive questions for all of us to answer and prepare ourselves as we go. But overall, I think it's a super exciting space. Listen to your consumers and evolve with them. They'll tell you what you need to be doing.
So every business is a content business. Technical singularity is here. And you better be prepared in terms of how you segment your customers and your employees in terms of the digital natives and the digital immigrants. So thank you very much. But before I stop, there was one question on how are new age banks disrupting the traditional banks? And I'm going to save that, because as I saw that question, I saw Mr. Aditya Puri walking in, so you should save that question for him when he comes up to the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Sushma. Ladies and gentlemen, there you go, the world of the hyper-connected consumer. I'm going to request you to hand over tokens of our appreciation to all of our speakers. It's a world of instant connectivity, brutal honesty, and the always-on consumer keeps these brands on their toes. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, please give a huge round of applause to our speakers. And Sushma, as always, thank you so much for chairing that session so wonderfully. Thank you. With that, it gives me immense pleasure to move on to the next segment of what we have in store for all of you today.